if I'm a slave owner and I'm in a church and I know my brother here is a slave that I have or somebody else owns him, let's just make it personal. This is someone that I own. He is my slave, like Philemon and Onesimus. If I release him, and this is actually a problem during the Civil War too. If I can't demonstrate legal claim over him, then someone else can capture him and take him. Someone who would be a whole lot worse than I am. And since he's my brother in Christ, I'm not going to mistreat him. But I cannot guarantee his safety if I just let him go. He has no legal standing in this culture. He can cry and moan and debate till he's blue in the face to somebody who says, I found this guy or I want this guy, for whatever reason, and he's mine now, submit some legal claim. If I cannot overturn that, there is nothing I can do. Baal Cycle in Daniel 7, again, I'm not going to throw up the parallel here again, but the elements of the scene, the heavenly council scene in the Baal Cycle where El, the aged El is presiding over the council meeting, and Baal does wonderful stuff. And then Baal is given the kingship, and it's an everlasting kingdom. Baal is the one who rides the clouds and all that. Why does Daniel track on this? Well, Daniel would like his readers, who we assume literate people at this time, know who El is and know who Baal is. Frankly, you can't miss them. If you live in Canaan and you have a pulse, okay, and you've read anything or listened to mom and dad at their bedtime stories, you've heard about El and Baal. They are ubiquitous. Frankly, you just can't get away from Baal in the ancient world. Baal worship persists all the way up into the early church. I mean, it sticks around for a long time. The writer of Daniel wants us to know that, hey, the lead god of heaven is not El, and he doesn't have a separate deity, Baal. The lead god in heaven, yes, is this father figure, but the Ancient of Days, again, is his co-regent, and it's to this Son of Man, this human one, that's what Son of Man means. Human one. To him will be given everlasting kingship and dominion. Now, I'm depending a little bit in this audience on you understanding the significance of Daniel 7 and the significance of the cloud rider language. If you're not familiar with that, I'm going to take 5 minutes and run through that. The phrase or phrases like it, one who rides the clouds, one who rides the chariot through the heavens, something like that. That was a well-known title for Baal in the ancient world. Baal was not viewed as a mere angel or a flunky. Baal was the real deal. He is king of the gods in Canaan. He is a major player. Yes, he still has to ask El for permission now and then to do stuff. But he's the main focus. El and Baal are two separate deities. Baal is a big deal. Now here's the kicker. The phrase, one who rides through the clouds, since that is always used of Baal in the ancient world, people knew that when you described somebody with that phrase, you were talking about a deity, a full deity, not a quasi-deity, not a wannabe deity, but a real deity. In the Old Testament, that description occurs 5 times. 4 of those times are used of Yahweh. He's the one who rides through the clouds. He is the one who traverses the heavens. And the significance of it is, why does Baal get that title? Baal he's not just a fertility deity, he's also a storm deity. Baal is the one who gives us rain. And rain's important. Why is rain important? Because I like to eat. Okay? I need crops, and my animals like to eat. Baal keeps us alive. Isn't he wonderful? He gives us rain, and we have enough to eat, and the kids play in it now and then. And the flocks and the herds, they have enough to eat, and we can milk them and eat a few of them too. It's just wonderful. And Baal gives us all these things. The Old Testament writers 4 times say, no, you dunderheads. Okay? It's not Baal who gives you these things. It's Yahweh of Israel. The 5th time that the rider in the clouds is used is Daniel 7. And then it's not used of Yahweh, God the Father. It's used of the Son of Man. That's the outlier. So now you have 2 Yahweh figures in Daniel 7. And one of them is in human form. This is why the rabbis, the Jewish community who know their text really well, this is why Daniel 7 became the focal point for something called the 2 powers in heaven doctrine. Do you realize Judaism used to teach a Godhead in their theology? Because of passages like Daniel 7. And there are other passages where God refers to God in the 3rd person. There are a number of these in the Old Testament. So the rabbis thought, okay, we got 2 powers here. We've got a transcendent Yahweh figure, and now we've got one that's like appears occasionally as a man, the angel of the Lord, the captain of the Lord's host, all this kind of stuff. We've got 2 powers in heaven that's not good and evil. They're 2 good guys, and we're good with that. In between the testaments, there are reams and reams of material in Jewish writings speculating who the 2nd power was. Who's the 2nd Yahweh figure? Does he have an identity beyond that? And you had people, debate, and they had their favorite candidates and stuff like that. Again, if you've read, God forbid anybody in here who's read my dissertation, but you get it there. Unseen Realm, I have some of this stuff, and I've done lectures, you can get them on YouTube about this. All that changed at the end of the 1st century. Judaism declared the 2 powers idea a heresy. We don't want to hear this talk anymore. Why? Because of Jesus. The Christians were saying, we have a candidate. This is why in the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus is on trial before Caiaphas gets a little miffed at him and says, tell us who you are. Tell us who you are. And Jesus' answer, it's easy for us to read it and think, Jesus is just being clever. He just wants to put Caiaphas off. He wants to tease him a little bit. Yeah, you're going to figure it out, Caiaphas. He says, it's Mike's paraphrase, you really want to know who I am? Here's his answer. Hereafter you will see the Son of Man coming upon the clouds of heaven. We know Caiaphas understood that he was claiming to be deity by that statement, and therefore the 2nd Yahweh. How do we know that? Because of the very next verse, Caiaphas tears his clothes and says, this is blasphemy. We have no further need of witnesses. This was part of Jewish theology. And so when Daniel 7 is structured as it is, in the Old Testament context, it's a rebuttal. It's a rebuttal to the idea that El and Baal, 2 distinct deities, are running the show. No, I'm sorry, they're not. It's Yahweh, the Ancient of Days, and then the 2nd Yahweh, the one come as the Son of Man, to whom everlasting kingship is given. They are the same, and they run the show. That's why they do it. The writer of Daniel 7 knows that his readers are going to pick up on how this is a response to Canaanite theology. They do this all over the place. I mean, the next one we have here, and it's not polytheism because they're both Yahweh. Psalm 74. Why does the psalmist come up with this weird story about God defeating the chaos dragon, Leviathan, and smashing the heads of the sea dragons and all this weird stuff? Why is that? Well, all of those elements, Leviathan, Yam, be the sea, Yam was a deity in Canaan, Nahar, the streams. Nahar was a deity in Canaan. All of these things are, again, ripped out of the Baal cycle to make specific theological points. If you read the Baal cycle, it's Baal who defeats the elements, again, who defeats the waters of chaos and makes the earth a habitable place for humans and gives us rain and streams and crops and all this stuff. The psalmist says, pardon me, pardon moi, okay? No, it's not. It's the Lord who conquers chaos and brings order out of chaos and create a world in which humans can live. The psalmist is banking on the notion that his readers will have read this other stuff. And they'll pick up on it and see that it's a poke in the eye to Baal. It steals Baal's glory. It steals Baal's status to his audience, to the psalmist's audience. Maybe not to us because we don't know much about Baal. And I'm not saying go out and learn a lot about Baal. It's just if you do ancient Near Eastern studies, you can't miss Baal. He's just everywhere. But they would have known it. Why does he apply it in the same passage to the Exodus? Were not the waters subdued in the Exodus? Who has power over the elements? It's the Red Sea. Of course, you're going to bring up the Exodus because it's not only God showing his authority over elements of nature that would seek to destroy. It's not only that, but he, again, by doing so, shows that he is the Most High God, and the result in Genesis is a wonderful new creation, the world created for human habitation. In the Exodus, he's creating something new too. It's called a nation. He takes a bunch of slaves out of Egypt that began as an extended family from one guy called Abraham and says, we're going to do something new now. That's also a sidebar. Why I think the best, I'm in agreement with, this is actually a big controversy in biblical studies. What does the name Yahweh mean? I take it as a hifil, third person, imperfect verb form from the to be verb that means he who causes to be, he who brings into existence. You'll notice that you get the third person name reference in conjunction with the call of Moses, whose job it is to bring the people out of Egypt and through the Red Sea. It's a creative act of God. It's an act of power, is what it is. So, of course, you're going to compare creating the new nation with the creation of the world. And you're going to credit both to the true God, Yahweh of Israel. This is what you do. Who loses glory? It's Baal. There's another one of these, they're scattered ones. In Psalm 24, lift up your heads, O ye gates. Okay. Who is this King of glory? There's language in Psalm 24 lifted from the Baal cycle again. In the Baal scene, there's a voice that asks the other gods in the assembly when Baal enters the assembly, who is this King of glory? In Psalm 24, there are no other gods in the picture. It's lift up your heads, O ye gates. The word is changed, but the refrain is the same. Who is the King of glory? And it's the Lord, Yahweh, strong and mighty. Again, if you're a literate person in the ancient world, you have heard these things said of Baal before. You may have read them, you may have heard them recited at a public festival, especially when most of your kings who are Israelites are off worshiping Baal anyway. You're going to have heard this stuff. And then the psalmist comes along and changes things around. If you read Psalm 24, there are other references in there about the Lord having control over the waters. There we go again. Over the streams and over the sea. These are forces that are deified. They're actually deities in Canaanite religion whom Baal supposedly defeated. No, in Psalm 24, it's Yahweh who brings them into submission. Who is this King of glory? Again, to the Israelite, they know the context of this. It never would have occurred to an Israelite to ask a question like, well, why are you quoting that Baal stuff? It never would have popped into their heads to even ask the question. They know why they're doing it, and they're liking it. It's fun to poke Baal in the eye. Why not? Okay, Matthew 2. Out of Egypt have I called my son. Is there a prophetic problem? Whose problem is it? Again, who's the Son of God, and why is the identification important? I made the comment that Matthew uses Hosea 11:1 when Hosea is looking backward in time at the nation of Israel, who is the Son, in Exodus chapter 4, the Son of God. By the way, the only things you're going to see called singular Son of God in the Old Testament are the nation of Israel and the Israelite king. Okay, that's important because if we call Jesus the Son of God, you identify him with the kingship and with the nation itself. Why is it important to identify him with the nation? Because elsewhere the nation is called the servant in Isaiah, except for Isaiah 53, where the servant is an individual. Okay? These are all, like I say, an unseen realm. These are like pieces of a puzzle. It's like a mosaic. You've got to put the pieces together to get the full picture. There's scattered data points that we need to connect. That's our task as interpreters. In Matthew's case, he knows what Hosea is talking about. So why does he quote it? Matthew never had the thought of, well, I don't really know what Hosea is saying, and I don't really much care because I kind of like the verse. And so I'm going to put it in here. No. He sees an analogy between what happened to the nation, who is the Son of God, and what just happened with Jesus. And he uses fulfillment language to say that one thing prefigured the other. It's typology. If you're not familiar with typology, prophecy is verbal forecasting when it's used to predict the future. When we're talking about futuristic things, verbal prophecy is you verbally say something's going to happen. Typology is non-verbal prophecy. An institution, an event, some person prefigures something that will happen later. Verbal versus nonverbal, that's the difference between the two. It's important because we want the Messiah to be identified with the nation and with the king. So is Matthew a hermeneutical hack? No. He knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing. The issue of slavery. Our Ephesians 5 and Philemon endorsement of slavery. Why not call for defiance? Why not say you need to go into your churches and tell the slaves to run away and tell the masters to release them and do all this stuff? Can you think of any reason why that would not have been a good idea? Economics, but there's even a more immediate concern. If I'm a slave owner and I'm in a church and I know my brother here is a slave that I have or somebody else owns him, let's just make it personal. This is someone that I own. He is my slave, like Philemon and Onesimus. If I release him, and this is actually a problem during the Civil War too. If I can't demonstrate legal claim over him, then someone else can capture him and take him. Someone who would be a whole lot worse than I am. And since he's my brother in Christ, I'm not going to mistreat him. But I cannot guarantee his safety if I just let him go. He has no legal standing in this culture. He can cry and moan and debate till he's blue in the face to somebody who says, I found this guy, or I want this guy, for whatever reason, and he's mine now, submit some legal claim. If I cannot overturn that, there is nothing I can do. If I'm treating him well, he is actually safer with me than I put him at risk. Now, Paul knows this. Paul doesn't tell Philemon what to do. He recommends it, but he doesn't recommend that they part company either. He knows that one loves the other and all that kind of stuff. And he talks the slave up as much as he can. He's a true brother. He's valuable. Take care of him. And Paul leaves that to Philemon to figure out what's the best way to do that. He can't go in and call for slave revolts. Has anyone ever seen Spartacus? Yeah. If you go, you don't just go into churches in the Roman Empire and say, we're going to organize a protest and we're going to put an end to this practice. In other words, follow me and you're all going to die. Okay, this is not our culture. Paul isn't given 2 thumbs up to slavery. Paul's given 2 thumbs up to figure out a way so that people don't get mistreated and killed. That's what he's doing. But to us, because we have these mechanisms in our culture, and we have this whole awful history of this that, good grief, we fought a civil war over this, all right? Even that didn't solve the problem because of, politics in the all the way up into the 1960s, and really even, even still today. We at least have the mechanisms to have the discussion and try to do something about it. Rome did not operate that way. Rome had no patience for this. You're a slave or you're dead. Take your pick. And Paul knows this. And so what Paul's problem is we've got to get people to treat each other the right way and then do what we can so that people don't die. They're not tortured, they're not died, their situation doesn't get any worse. It's not an easy thing. This is what he's dealing with. The one that's really put at risk, the only person really put at risk here is the slave, by the whole question. The owner is going to have legal standing, maybe a Roman citizen. They don't have the risk. The one that's in the crosshairs is the slave. And again, everybody concerned knows this. So it's a rock and a hard place issue. So what can we do to best protect the vulnerable? And so that's why he does what he does. And he's not saying, go out there and get some more. Get more slaves, and we love slaves. It's the farthest thing from his mind. Okay, this whole thing about Israel, Jerusalem being the center of the world. Is this about geography? Is it about literalism? Is it about latitude and longitude? No. It's metaphor, mythic theology is a term that scholars use. And by the way, myth doesn't mean not true. It means it's kind of a substitute word for supernatural theology. What do I mean by that? Now, in ancient cosmology, and I know if any of you who are into cosmology and mythology, this is from the Nordic tradition, this picture. I just like it. So I use it. I just like it. It's just kind of cool. But you'll notice, and you can find world tree thinking in the ancient Near East. That's not the point. It's just that the picture I took from a website that was talking about the same idea in Nordic thinking. Like I said, I just like it. There was this idea of the world tree. You say, well, that's just kind of goofy. Well, what they meant by that was not a literal tree that is huge, makes Godzilla look like this big. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about the fact that the underworld and this world and the celestial world are connected. And so the best way to illustrate that is to have a tree whose top reaches to the heavens, which is planted on earth, and its roots go down into the underworld. It's connected. The physical world and the celestial world and the realm of the dead, the dark spiritual world, are connected. They're not disconnected, they are connected. And this was an iconographic, artistic way of conveying this idea. And so to be at the center, that doesn't mean, well, we got out our longitude and latitude instruments, and it took us a few years to measure. No, that's not what they're talking about at all. To be at the center of this is to be the focal point of the connection. It's the place where the spiritual world and the physical world intersect. It's the most important place there is for that reason. So when they call Jerusalem the center of the earth, the center of the world, it's the place where God meets man. It's the place where God, man, the living and the dead are connected. It's a theological statement. But again, we don't think in these abstract ways. This is why in world tree thinking, the center of everything is either a garden or a mountain. If you've read Unseen Realm, this is familiar turf. Gardens and mountains are where the gods dwell, because this is the place that becomes the headquarters for the spiritual governance of that world, and the intersection of that world with the physical world and the governance of the physical world. These things are all interconnected. They should not be separated. And that place is God's living room, okay? It's his home office. That is where things happen, where everything is held together and everything appropriately runs. And of course, God lives in the best place. He lives in a garden. In an arid agricultural society, that was paradise. God's not going to live in a dumpy one-room apartment somewhere. He's going to live in the best place where there's no want, there's no death, there's only life. It's life springing up everywhere. Everything is sustained. There's abundance. Of course, you would associate these things with God because he is the source of life. Mountains, he's different than we, he's distant, he's separated from us. Again, these are all metaphors. This is metaphorical thinking, and it plays out in the biblical text. I just picked two passages in Ezekiel. It has nothing to do with literal geography. It has everything to do with supernatural theological truth. There's no person in the ancient world that thinks, well, you know what? That world tree ain't so big because I can't see it from my porch, okay? Nobody's thinking that. They're familiar with the idea. And humans build structures like temples and ziggurats and pyramids to convey the connection between heaven, earth, and under the earth. This is why they do what they do. It's an operative metaphor just across the board. But we read this stuff and we think, man, I got to make this fit literal geography, or I got an error in the Bible. It's absurd. It's just absurd. It shows that you don't understand what you're reading. That's what it shows. I'm putting myself in this because I not only didn't wake up or was born knowing that when I became born again, I didn't know it either, okay? You just pick things up. And we live in a world where we have so many resources to help us get into the mindset. As I say in Unseen Realm, I want the Israelite living in your head. Okay. I want him rent-free, living in your head, or the first century Jew. Because the more you can see the text the way they would have seen it, you'll begin to understand it. And the weird passages will start to make sense if you kind of know, what they're trying to convey. We won't repeat this one. This is the last one about the celestial, the dome over the earth and all that kind of stuff. Because we did some of that in Q&A. But what are we asked to believe, with these descriptions? And just to repeat what we said before, what we're asked to believe, and again, God choosing people who he knows aren't going to get the details scientifically precise. And by the way, if we wrote Genesis today, we wouldn't get it precise either. It's ultimately unknowable and unfathomable. If God were to sit here and let me just tell you in excruciating detail exactly how this works, and right, nobody's going to track on that. So God would have the same problem now as before. And the fact that God had people who didn't have this knowledge write this stuff before tells you, by definition, God doesn't care. What he cares about is, what does this teach people? He teaches them that I made everything. I made them. That means they're accountable to me. It also means I love them. It also means that when I created them, I had a purpose in mind, because I don't just do things for no reason, because I'm a rational being. Rational beings have intent. Otherwise, they'd be irrational. And I'm not an irrational being. I mean, you learn all sorts of theological things that are really important. I had a destiny in mind for them. Why does God refer to humans in family terms? Something as simple as noticing that. This is unseen realm, supernatural territory. God speaks of humans in two ways. He describes them as children, which is a family term. And that's why it's important to notice that, because that's never going to change. All the way through both Testaments. Children terminology. The other way he describes them is partners. They are his imagers, his representatives. They are the holy ones, and the holy ones in the Old Testament are the members of God's council. We are called holy. It gets translated saints, which I hate in English Bibles. Just had a spasm. That's one of the few things every time I think about it, I just want to scream. Holy ones. Because you translated holy ones, that will mentally connect the way God describes believers in the New Testament with the way he described his supernatural children in the Old Testament. Why is that important? Because humanity was created from the beginning to be fit for the divine presence. We're supposed to be with God. By definition. Of course, that isn't the way it plays out. But the fact that God uses this terminology of people tells you that I wanted you from the very beginning to be with me. It's really important. These are important themes and concepts and terms, and sometimes they just get obscured, in the language. But all of these ideas, and I'm not a scientist, I don't need any of that to communicate it. I need none of it. All I need to do is be able to articulate who God is and who I am, who all of us are, and we're going to be good. And again, you've heard my spiel on it. God knew all that. God isn't learning anything when we go over this material. There are no new insights for it. He had this in his head from the very beginning, and he's fine with it. Again, the real question is, are we fine with it? That's the tougher question.